Heroes in Crisis 9. So after visiting the sanctuary trying to avoid another flashback scenario, past Wally West leans in to break future Wally West's neck. In order to close the timeline, one of the Wallys has to die, right? So then Blue Beetle, Batgirl, Harley, and Booster, they all land and they're super confused seeing what's unfolding. Then they see Poison Ivy, who was presumed dead at the time. So future Wally knows how he feels, so he helps him up and reassures him that he's not alone. And as he himself was there just 5 days prior. Don't kill, don't run, just talk and listen. Pretty solid advice. He goes on to explain that if people could see that even the strongest of heroes are hurting inside, that they need to talk to people. Which is a pretty solid line. I feel like a lot of people reading this could use that advice in their own lives in some way. Booster suggests not killing Wally, but instead completing the loop. So by bringing back a Speed clone from the 25th century, that way the old Flash can live on, and the young Flash does the loop over. Kinda like how Cap took the stones back in time to complete that loop. See, while Cap's still alive, he's kinda not because he's stuck in that loop, right? So he's gone, but he's not. But he's gone, but he's not. He's gone. The Heroes in Crisis storyline to take out Wally West went under fire. Like, I mean, what do you guys think? Were you a fan of how the deconstruction of Wally West came about? Let us know down below. Let's talk about it.
The death of Jason Todd was so surprising that it not only shocked readers, it shocked DC themselves. Now, the character has had a pretty weird history, as he was introduced as the new Teenage Robin after Dick Grayson grew up and became Nightwing. But fan reaction to Jason was pretty mixed. In 1988, DC Comics writer Denny O'Neil pitched the idea of making the readers vote via a 1-900 number on how a story would end, and O'Neil knew the vote couldn't be on something small, so he decided the vote would be about the fate of the second Robin, Jason Todd. Knowing that Todd was relatively unpopular, it would help settle what needed to be done with the character. So, setting up a 36-hour voting period, readers got one of two numbers to call from the back of Batman number 427. The ending of that issue showed us the Joker beating Todd with a crowbar, leaving him in a warehouse that was set to explode. Then issue 428 came out and the final vote was 5,343 for killing Todd and 5,721 against it, meaning his fate was sealed. Jason Todd was dead, and the iconic image of Batman carrying Todd's body that followed was one that is still recognizable to most comic fans today. Years after the event, O'Neil revealed there was actually someone who programmed their phone to call every 90 seconds for 8 hours. That person chose the same option every time for Jason Todd to die. Totaling around 320 votes from that one person alone, O'Neil has gone on record saying that one person was the reason why Jason died in the first place. If you're not familiar with this storyline, aka Death in the Family, check it out for yourself, starting with 1988's Batman Volume 1 number 426 to number 429.
One of the most shocking series around is JJ and his son Henry Abrams' Spider-Man miniseries from 2019. Well, it started in 2019. It is only 5 issues long, but has been delayed longer than I even thought possible for a series like this. Number 4 is finally set to come out September 23rd, and 5 has been pushed from its original release of January 2020 to November of 2020. Yikes, that's a huge delay. This series starts off with a bang and is filled with tons of interesting shocks. Mary Jane dies pretty much right off the bat, killed by the villain we later come to know as Cadaverous, and causing Peter Parker to retire and abandon their son Ben, leaving him in Aunt May's care. Which is pretty crazy because Aunt May was already pretty old when Spider-Man started, so yeah. And when Peter Parker does return, he's got a moody look, a beard, and a hook hand. That is some kind of something. Peter with a hook for a hand in a world where we have super advanced prosthetics and where he's friends with genius level heroes like Tony Stark and Reed Richards and, you know, is a genius himself. And I thought I'd seen everything.
Now, if there's one member of the X-Men that you can truly trust, it's definitely Wolverine. He is surprisingly loyal and dictated by a code of honor. Still though, that doesn't stop a betrayal or two from happening every now and then, though it wasn't necessarily his own fault. In the Wolverine Old Man Logan storyline, we get to see the vicious side of Wolverine that we've all come to know and love. However, like I said, it wasn't really his fault. So basically it's the future and Logan is an old man, and he hasn't used the Wolverine persona or his claws since this mysterious night in the past when the villains supposedly attacked. We learned through some flashbacks that a massive group of 40 supervillains attacked the X-Men mansion, and during this attack, Wolverine gets in touch with his primal side and grows crazy and just kills every single one of them. After the fight and the intense slaughter, things change and Wolverine realizes that this was all just an illusion. The entire time Wolverine had his vision and mind altered by Mysterio, and all the villains that he killed in combat were actually his fellow X-Men. This destroyed Logan and he decided to retire his Wolverine mantle for good after that, essentially killing that part of him so he would never do something like that again. It's definitely a sad way to end a run as a hero, but I can see why he felt that was necessary, and as much as I hate to say it, this was a huge betrayal and definitely a shocking one at that.
Death of the Family was another shocking DC story all around. I mean, it's another huge Joker plot, and shocking is something we've come to expect from Batman's arch nemesis. If you expect it, can it still be shocking? I think so. Joker is one of those villains who almost always gets away. After all, Joker is the most iconic villain and is so popular, it would be truly shocking if DC did something like, I don't know, kill him off? Well, at the end of Death of the Family, that is just what appears to happen. Joker plummets to his death off an underground cliff, and while we all know falling into a pit does not equal death, all nerds should know this, he was presumed dead and would remain so until the events of Endgame in 2017. DC's Endgame, not Marvel's Endgame, just FYI. Endgame took place, by the way, almost a full 2 years after he went missing at the end of Death of the Family. Of course, in Endgame it would be revealed that Joker was fully restored via a pool of Dionysium found at the bottom of a cliff, and that he'd been laying low disguised as Arkham Asylum orderly Eric Border. But we wouldn't know that till later.
Your kind will fail. Your kind will always fail. Those are some of the last words spoken by Martian Manhunter in Final Crisis 1 after he gets trapped in a prison. He had originally went there to be undercover as John Jones and regularly reported back to Batman. Then the villains broke free and he was left behind. Ooh, not good. Human Flame had given the villain Libra instructions to kill Martian Manhunter. Don't do it! So Libra went and stabbed Martian Manhunter with a staff in front of the entire secret society of supervillains, or SS or SOV. Okay, some acronyms don't work, okay? So upon his death, he returned back to his Martian form, and in his final moments, he still managed to send a message back to the Justice League. What a trooper! They held his funeral on his home planet Mars, with Superman giving the eulogy. Can you do mine as well, Superman? My eulogy, please? In time, not now, just like when it happens. Thanks. His final moments were expanded on in the Final Crisis Requiem storyline, teaching us more about his homeworld and the inhabitants of it.
For so many heroes, one of their biggest fears is that their secret identity will get out and put their loved ones at risk, so generally they do all they can in order to prevent that from happening. In Kyle Rayner's case, he learned the hard way what happens if you're not careful enough. After taking over the Green Lantern mantle from Hal Jordan and receiving his power ring, Rayner seeks out his girlfriend Alexandra, or Alex DeWitt. DeWitt wasn't sure what to make of the new power Rayner had acquired, but eventually helped Rayner control and understand the potential he had command over. In hindsight, probably not the best idea, because one day he came home and found out that she had been killed by the supervillain Major Force and had been stuffed into a refrigerator. Kyle, obviously upset and motivated by anger and regret, sought out Major Force. Kyle almost killed Major Force before his ring runs out of power, and then Major Force takes over the fight until his quote-unquote green rock that powers the power rings turns into a lantern battery and charges Rayner's ring. Rayner finally subdues Major Force, but when he begins to interrogate Major Force over why he was there and why he killed DeWitt, the police arrive and try to take Rayner away. Rayner obviously flees and runs into Alan Scott, who tries to console him over his loss. DC writer Gail Simone, now a legend in her own right, was horrified that the company had consented to kill a female character in such a gruesome way, merely to motivate the male protagonist. She coined the term "women in refrigerators" for any time women in comics were killed, seriously injured, violated, or depowered merely to motivate male heroes, and she published a long list of such cases. Check out her death for yourself in 1994's Green Lantern Volume 3, number 55.
Spider-Man did this as part of the Civil War story arc in order to help motivate other supers to do so, and to support his friend and in a way mentor, Tony Stark, who at the time was on the side of being for the Superhuman Registration Act, believing being against it would only lead to an all-out war with the government and be worse for supers later on. This was one of the most memorable and shocking moments of that event, outside of, Tony and Cap full on fighting one another and going to all-out war. Spider-Man revealed his secret identity to the world during a press conference, prompting his boss at the Daily Bugle, J.J. Jameson, who had always considered Spider-Man a menace and an enemy, to promptly fire him. His unmasking also gave Iron Man and his supporters the fuel they needed to build concentration camps in the negative zone for non-registered super folks. Yeah, pretty controversial move there. Spider-Man would eventually get his secret identity back during another shocking and controversial, for different reasons, story, One More Day. But that's a tale for another list. maybe a part 4.
In a possible future, this iteration of the Flash is a much darker Barry Allen with 20 years in the future. This future Flash first appears in the Flash Annual Volume 4 number 3 as a broken man. Reeling from the death of a close friend and fellow speedster Wally West, future Flash travels backwards through time on a crusade to murder all of the former enemies he deems responsible for West's death, hoping to somehow change the future. His actions only widen a tear in the Speed Force, however, and the once hero ultimately decides to use a present-day Barry Allen's energy to seal the rift. Proving his superiority in a one-on-one battle against the present-day Barry, the pair are soon interrupted by the arrival of Wally West himself. Able to take on both speedsters at once, Future Flash's actions caused the one thing he began his quest to stop: the death of Wally West. Barry killed numerous rogues along the way before learning the error of his ways with help from his past girlfriend Patty Spivot, and eventually gave his life to save the present-day Barry Allens.
All the events surrounding Mysterio's death were pretty nuts. Mysterio took his own life following his failed attempt to corrupt Daredevil. The whole Daredevil plot was also pretty nuts. One, because it was all quite involved as Mysterio tried to ruin Daredevil's life. Poor Matt. Everyone is always trying to ruin his life and mess with his head, and really, the dude has enough problems as is just dealing with past traumas. And 2, Mysterio jumping into a Daredevil story was just something very different, as Mysterio is pretty much exclusively a Spider-Man villain. At the time, Mysterio had already been dying of cancer, and so when his plot failed, he decided his time was done. What was also pretty neat was all the uncertainty surrounding his death. This being Mysterio, many fans were skeptical that he was even dead, with some believing that he'd faked his death.
Taking place in the Infinite Crisis storyline, Superboy is killed by Superboy Prime. What? So the other dimension Superboy Prime basically gets jealous and wants to take Superboy's spot in the Paradise dimension. He thinks he's more fitting. Yeah, okay pal, whatever you say. So Superboy Prime attacks him and kicks his ass. Backup arrives, that being the Teen Titans, Doom Patrol, and the Justice Society of America, but the next encounter ends much worse than the previous. Connor and Prime go at it, and eventually Superboy crashes them both into Alexander Luthor's multiverse tower, causing this massive explosion, stopping Alexander from destroying New Earth. Dying in the arms of Wonder Girl, Connor is told by Cassie that he saved the Earth. And in a glorious last line, he says, "I know, Cass, isn't it cool?" And then he dies just moments before the rest of the gang showed up. Superman mourning his death is actually just heartbreaking.
Now at its core, Identity Crisis is a love story wrapped inside a murder mystery with a concerted effort to bring real-world crime and quote-unquote darkness to the Justice League's ivory watchtower. It all starts with the death of Sue Dibney, the elongated man's wife, and from there it spirals into a story of lines being crossed by which supervillains and heroes. Addressing heavy topics like forced mind wiping, the story made some readers pretty uncomfortable, and when all was said and done, the family members of a few heroes were dead and the reputations of others were tarnished in brand new ways. It's eventually realized by Dr. Midnight, Mr. Terrific, and Batman, all separately I might add, that Sue was murdered using some pretty familiar tech. However, it's not done by someone that you would expect. Cover your ears now if you don't want to hear who it was. Okay, the murderer was Jean Loring, the wife of the Atom who was committed to Arkham Asylum after she's discovered. There are 2 viewings of Identity Crisis. One is a dark tragedy reflective of the real world, and one is a tenaciously destructive tentacle of the Watchmen squid monsters still wriggling around 15 years later. I've only seen the former, but if you've seen the latter, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Haven't read it and want to give it a go? Well, check out 2004's Identity Crisis number 1 all the way to 2005's Identity Crisis number 7.
Wanda is kind of the queen of shocking moments. Her magic is often unpredictable, resulting in many twists and turns to come about in the comics. But aside from its unpredictability, it's also very powerful, meaning that when Wanda does manage to get her magic right, it still usually gives us very shocking results. That was the case when Wanda had a psychotic break and created an alternate reality which began to crack and crumble as those supers within it began to see it for what it was, a fake reality created and shaped by Wanda herself, a sham. Frustrated with her father Magneto's obsession to fight for mutant kind, she then altered reality once more as everyone seemed to be coming for her, speaking the words, "No more mutants" in the House of M series. This day, November 2nd, would become known as M-Day in the Marvel Universe, the day when millions of mutants lost their powers, and we still see the consequences for many characters involved in the comics even today, almost 15 years later. Pretty crazy considering how many events get retconned out of existence almost.
Now if I'm being honest, there is probably no betrayal more famous than that of Terra Markov's. Debuting in New Teen Titans number 26, Terra Markov was a young, precocious girl who joined the team. It was learned later that Terra infiltrated the team at the behest of Deathstroke, dismantling the team from the inside. Throughout the 4-part storyline, Terra gives Terminator all of the information he needs in order to take down the Titans one by one, and he does so starting with Corey and Donna Troy, slowly making his way through all of them until he got to Dick Grayson, who was able to elude him. Realizing that he can never truly retire from superheroing, Dick adopts a new costume and identity and calls himself Nightwing, while Joey is also ready to follow him into battle as Jericho. Adeline then gives the heroes the location of the Hive Command Center, and Nightwing and Jericho go to the Hive base nestled in the Rocky Mountains, sneaking into the facility and discovering that the Teen Titans have been strapped to a giant machine which is slowly siphoning away all of their life energy. Nightwing and Jericho fight through a horde of Hive shock troops, but are eventually captured. Using the Terminator's body and weaponry, Jericho frees the other Titans and begins fighting the Hive, and Terra is enraged at Terminator and feels that his affection of Joey makes him look weak. She completely loses control of her sanity and yearns for nothing more than the death of everyone in the room. Changeling refuses to believe that Terra has gone bad and is certain that the Terminator has just brainwashed her. Terra's powers rage out of control until she finally causes a mountain of earth and debris to collapse down from the ceiling, unfortunately killing her in the process.
During the Darkseid War, we saw one of the strongest supervillains, Darkseid, defeated. Pretty impressive. It took a lot, but when the Flash merged with the Black Racer, in addition to exposure to the anti-life equation, Darkseid was finally defeated, and not just defeated, killed. This form of Darkseid would seemingly be gone forever, but in its place we did get a new Darkseid following these events. The baby of Earth 3's villainous Lois Lane, aka Superwoman, and Alexandra Luthor, was taken in by Darkseid's daughter, Grail, to be raised as the new Darkseid imbued with Darkseid's essence. Little essence of Darkseid in there. Now you got a new Darkseid baby. Also, it's super weird that Darkseid is raised by his daughter, but whatever. That's weird. Still weirds me out.
Taking place in the Kingdom Come miniseries, the world is in a future with our favorite superheroes much older. Basically out of touch with the times. So the new generation of superheroes are running free doing all the dirty work. Most of these offspring are children of past superheroes. Some of the new heroes, however, end up kind of being dicks. Yeah, they're becoming a threat, being irresponsible, and they're pretty dangerous. So Batman, being Batman, wanted to ensure a safe future and prevent a war between all of the supers. Not a bad idea, but a little too late. Captain Atom then lost a fight to Parasite. The end result, Captain Atom being ripped apart, causing a nuclear explosion that decimated the entire state of Kansas. Sorry, Kansas. Oops, my bad.
Hopefully we all know who Frank Miller is, one of the most influential and popular creators in comics today, having wrote and illustrated Batman The Dark Knight Returns and The Dark Knight Strikes Again. Ring a bell? Okay, good. Well, Frank Miller was also responsible for one of DC's most disturbing moments when he portrayed Superman and Wonder Woman, how should I say this, getting it on? All things considered, we've probably seen worse, right? After all, DC had Superman and Wonder Woman dating as part of their New 52 continuity, so it should come as no surprise that the two would, you know. However, Frank Miller's over-the-top writing showed that this act was actually killing an untold number of people. How, you might ask? Well, in one specific case, as these two godlike beings fly up in the air and crash down to Earth during the act, we see earthquakes erupting all over the planet, hurricanes forming, tsunamis going nuts, and Hawaii was actually completely evacuated. All for the payoff of a super dumb pun, with Wonder Woman noting that the Earth moved. But sure, it's a cute joke, but how many people died due to the carelessness of these two?
During the events of Axis, everyone had their alignments reversed when Wanda's magic went haywire like it usually does. Chaos magic? Nah, what you gonna do? Carnage as such became a hero, referring to himself as your friendly neighborhood Carnage, and attempting to fight for good like his usual nemesis, Spider-Man. The disturbing thing about his alignment reversal was that it didn't make Cletus Cassidy any less of a murdering psychopath. He still had those urges and had to fight to overcome them. Surprisingly, however, he behaved heroically enough that he was compelled to sacrifice himself in order to save the population of New York when the evil X-Men planted a gene bomb that would kill everyone in the city who wasn't a mutant. Pretty impressive. And he died, and then of course he came back because, well, it's still a comic book. How many times has Carnage lost his legs? That's some trivia for people. Answer me in the comments. How many times?
Aquaman has always been a bit torn, being a hero from two worlds and all. While he was Atlantean royalty, his primary concern is always the fate of his world's oceans. However, he still has this sense of responsibility towards the surface world of his father, and this really came to play in the Throne of Atlantis storyline. Aquaman finds himself at a crossroads with his brother's determination to start a war between Atlantis and the surface after malfunctioning Navy missiles hit Atlantis. He realizes, much to the surprise of his teammates, that the Atlanteans were utilizing a strategy he had devised in case the two powers ever went to war. Despite his close relationship with his fellow heroes, he refused to stand with the Justice League against the Atlanteans and ultimately staged a brutal offense against the Justice League in the battles that followed, forsaking his old team for his homeland. To add even more insult to injury, the League eventually discovered that Aquaman's longtime pal DEWITT'S Vulko was behind the whole thing. He orchestrated for Atlantis to be bombed specifically to incite a war. Now what was the end goal, you might ask? It was for the League to defeat Ocean Master, which would then lead to the reinstatement of Arthur as their king.
Recently, Thanos was killed off randomly in issue 6 of the 2019 Guardians of the Galaxy series. Of course, with Thanos, we know that no death will likely ever be finite for the big guy. But still, the fact that his death wasn't part of some massive event was pretty surprising and shocking. Like, if you weren't reading Guardians of the Galaxy, you might even have not known that this happened. Of course, his final death came hot on the heels of what we thought was already his final death. Gamora had killed him previously in Thanos Legacy issue number 1, even going so far as to behead the Mad Titan, but his lady love at the time, Hela, working with the Black Order, sought to resurrect Thanos. Yeah, Hela and Thanos' relationship is kind of random and sort of emerged from a villainous working relationship originally, though I guess it also makes sense somewhat as Hela is the Asgardian goddess of death, and that's usually something, you know, Thanos is into. It's all about death. Thanos was resurrected, but the process was interrupted, meaning that not all of Thanos' mind had returned to him. In the end, Hela and Thanos ended up sucked into a black hole, so it's also likely that we could see them both again somewhere in the near future, but I feel like usually most people that go into a black hole in real life, you're probably dead.
So after months of training from Batman, Stephanie Brown served as Robin during patrols. Nice, not a bad gig at all. Things were going well with the duo, you know, fighting crime, taking ass, kicking names, until she was captured by Mr. Zsasz and she resorted to using lethal force against him. That's a big no in Batman's eyes, so he fired her. Not even a write-up? Come on, dude. Even though she was saving his life, I mean, no? Alright. So her next step was to steal some plans and attempt to regain Batman's trust by going after Gotham's criminal underworld. Sneaky sneaky. This didn't go as planned and a citywide war erupted. Oof! Yikes. It wasn't long before Stephanie was captured by Black Mask. She was then tortured in order to spill the beans on Batman. So after a harrowing escape, she makes her way to Leslie Tompkins' clinic, in rough shape of course, and her injuries were too much to recover from, and Stephanie Brown died with the Caped Crusader by her side. How lovely and also how tragic.
Now I feel like I've already mentioned this before, but I am gonna mention it again. This is probably my favorite Batman storyline ever. The story involved the Joker breaking loose from Arkham Asylum, kidnapping Commissioner Gordon, and attempting to drive the man mad, all to prove that it only takes one terrible day to drive anyone crazy, which is actually a theme that was revisited in the Dark Knight movie, in which the Joker believes anyone will do terrible things if the circumstances are bleak enough. Along the way, Joker attacked Barbara Gordon in a way that still has people talking decades later. Joker shot her through the spine and paralyzed her. Later, while trying to drive Commissioner Gordon crazy, Joker showed him pictures he took of Barbara that showed Joker took off her clothes and insinuated some pretty bad things. Although regarded today as a classic Batman/Joker story, The Killing Joke has also received some deserved criticism for the way that it had the Joker paralyze Barbara Gordon, making her another victim in the woman in the refrigerator trope, which I will talk about just a little bit later. Barbara did later become a hero to many paraplegics when she became the cyber crime fighter known as Oracle, but the circumstances of her paralysis are still considered some of the most exploitative moments in comic book history to today. If you think you can stomach it, check out this one shot for yourself in 1988's Batman: The Killing Joke.
This shocking crossover event actually was so startling and well received that it effectively worked to help boost comic sales for the series involved. It follows the story of the mysterious villainous group of mutants known as the Marauders, who we'd later learn were working for the evil Mr. Sinister, as they attempt to murder the entire mutant community known as the Morlocks, many of whom have grotesque physical mutations which cause them to be rejected by society, a group whom Futurama likely took its inspiration from when it comes to their own sewer mutants. The Marauders succeed in their mission, killing hundreds of Morlocks during this gloomy attack, which would later be referred to as the Mutant Massacre. This story also featured a particularly shocking moment when the X-Factor come face to face with the Marauders, who crucify the mutant Angel.
In the pages of Countdown to Infinite Crisis, the Blue Beetle is left near bankruptcy after funds from his company were mysteriously stolen. His investigation into his missing fortune yields something much darker though, a conspiracy to wipe wipe out the superhuman community orchestrated by the Justice League International's former manager, Maxwell Lord. Now, he had enjoyed his influence over the Justice League and the formation of the Justice League International in the wake of Crisis on Infinite Earths. He was a wealthy and powerful businessman and claimed to have learned nobility and compassion from his late father, Maxwell Lord III. All of this pointed to him as a very genuine figure out to help keep Earth safe, but I guess we were wrong. During the Invasion saga, Lord acquires the superpower of mind control, and things only get worse from there. The build up to Infinite Crisis saw many shocking events occur in the DC universe, including Lord's brutal murder of Ted Kord, aka Blue Beetle II. Lord's betrayal continued to damage the League throughout Infinite Crisis, with Lord stealing Batman's metahuman satellite to hunt down every superhuman on Earth with an army of cyborgs at his disposal. Wonder Woman straight up just murders him though after he mind controls Superman into assaulting his fellow Leaguers. As a last laugh after death, footage of Wonder Woman snapping his neck leaks worldwide, causing her to be alienated from the rest of the League.
So I was talking with some of the other staff here at Top 10 Nerd, and apparently I'm the only one who is shocked by the passing of the Spook. So if there are other Spook fans out there, please make yourself known in the comments. Help me prove that I'm not the only Spook fan, unless I am. Boy, that would be embarrassing. More for Spook though, I think, than for me. For those who are less familiar with the Spook, he is a Batman villain known for being a master escape artist and for his hypnosis skills. The Spook was known for helping other criminals to escape from prison for a price. He actually helped build Gotham's maximum security prison and would find himself in prison there multiple times after being caught by Batman. Spook is a villain who has been around since the 1970s, and while he's appeared in under 50 issues, it's still always shocking to me when one of the original and older rogues passes away, because it's likely they won't be returning. Such was the case with Spook, who actually had been thought dead much earlier in his criminal career and returned 10 years later, but this time around in issue 657 of Batman, Damian Wayne killed him, taking his head as proof of the deed. Not something one usually comes back from, even if it has been. It's been over 10 years now as well in real life, so I don't think he's coming back.
I feel like we all knew this one was coming. Come on, this was definitely the most shocking betrayal in recent comic history. After the Red Skull messed with and manipulated Kobik, a sentient cosmic cube, Steve Rogers revealed himself to be a Hydra defector, but more specifically, he was a Hydra sleeper agent who happened to be a twisted version of Cap that secretly took his place. Allying himself with a new Madam Hydra, Rogers took advantage of a global catastrophe to seize control of the world's government. Once in power, Hydra just made its move. S.H.I.E.L.D., infiltrated by Hydra thoroughly, began assuming control of key locations and executing any who stand in its way. I'll let you all check out the storyline for yourself because it is a great one, but I will tell you that our good Cap comes out on top in the end, defeating his evil doppelganger in a head-to-head battle. A few weeks later, and after a ton of hard work, the United States was thankfully turned back to normal. By the mid-1980s, many of DC's superheroes had been around for about 50 years, and things were starting to get a little bit confusing. Early versions of characters didn't match up with later versions, and the comics had way too many continuity problems regarding ages, time periods, powers. There were just little flaws in continuity everywhere, especially with their bigger characters. Now, while most fans were willing to overlook these flaws, it was becoming more and more problematic with each passing year. Crisis on Infinite Earths changed the whole landscape of the DC universe and served as the first time a comic book company would reboot its entire continuity in order to revamp everything. Crisis on Infinite Earths essentially wiped out all of these continuity issues, the multiverse, and even several characters, because back when character deaths actually meant something, giving us a streamlined, consistent DC universe for the first time in a very long time. The storyline itself brought together heroes from all over DC's universes to battle the Anti-Monitor, and ended with some major deaths. As well as resetting the DC universe and revitalizing characters and storylines, Crisis was one of the first major overarching comic book crossover events. It really goes without saying, but if you haven't read this storyline yet, then you're truly missing out, so check out 1985's Crisis on Infinite Earths number 1, all the way to 1986's Crisis on Infinite Earths number 12.
Yeah, you heard me. In the final Crisis event, Batman himself killed Darkseid. Now, of course, Batman had to break his only rule to do this, but I mean, come on guys, it's Darkseid we're talking about. We can make an exception. By the time issue 6 rolls around, the world is on the brink of destruction. So Batman decides he's going to use the exact same bullet Darkseid used to kill Orion. So Batman aims and fires it right at his shoulder. Darkseid panics and tries to switch bodies into Detective Dan Turpin, but Wonder Woman comes in, uses a lasso of truth, and releases Darkseid's consciousness from Turpin's body. And at the same time, Batman died. What an event, that's right, so at the same time that Batman shot Darkseid with that bullet, Darkseid used the Omega Beams and just straight up obliterates Batman. Batman ended up teleporting to prehistoric times, but we can't not include that in this list part of this moment.
Heroes in Crisis gave us multiple shocking deaths, but one such death was shocking not only because it was the death of a major character, but because it completely revamped that character's design and later on led to a different path. Poison Ivy was one of those reported dead in the event at the Sanctuary, and had currently been on a heroic path at the time. She was soon after resurrected using a rose she'd given Harley Quinn by Wally West himself, who actually turned out was responsible for her death. But this time around, she looked completely different when she came back, so both her death and her resurrection were pretty surprising, and this all happened in one story, one event.
During the events of Countdown to Infinite Crisis, Ted was tracking a signal from a bug. He followed it to Checkmate headquarters in Switzerland. Upon arriving, he finds files containing all the information of all Earth's superheroes. I'm talking their strengths, weaknesses, identities even. A lot of bad stuff. And then in comes Black King and, drumroll please, Maxwell Lord. The longtime ally had been planning to use Brother Eye and the OMACs to kill all of Earth's metahumans. So once the files were deleted, Ted makes a run for it. Stopped by an OMAC and locked up, Maxwell comes in to deliver the final bullet to his head, right after he tells Maxwell to rot in hell, that is.
In 1992, in response to not being able to do their original story, which was to have Lois Lane and Clark get married, due to conflicts with the then upcoming Lois and Clark The New Adventures of Superman, the writers of the Superman titles just decided to straight up kill him instead. The way they pulled this off was to introduce a new character, an almost unthinkable monster whose only purpose was to destroy things. Dubbed Doomsday, he cut a swath of destruction towards Metropolis. Jump forward a little bit to 1993 and we see Superman take on this unstoppable bad guy. Now obviously Superman was able to take down the bad guy because he's, you know, Superman, but both Doomsday and Superman ended up succumbing to their injuries at the end of the fight. While some heroes have been resurrected multiple times, this was the first and only time that Clark Kent bit the dust, and it sent shockwaves through the entire world of comics. The aftermath of the story followed how the world reacted and who showed up to take its place, the latter part featuring the introduction of several new characters who stuck around to help form the later DCU. Death of Superman is one of the most far-reaching media events in comics history, and that coupled with the return of Superman changed the rules for DC forever, opening the door for anyone to come back to life. Check out the storyline for yourself so you can see firsthand what this death meant to the DC universe, starting with 1992 Superman The Man of Steel Volume 1, number 18.
During the events of Axis, we also learned that Wanda and Pietro were not actually the blood relatives of Magneto, and were not even mutants. This all came about when Scarlet Witch attempted to perform some blood magic on her family members. It worked on Pietro, but not on Magnus. Fans would later learn this was because Wanda and Pietro were not actually mutants' children. In fact, they weren't even mutants. The High Evolutionary had experimented on them when they were just babies, and had simply disguised them as mutants and returned them after he was finished with his experimentation. This is still definitely one of my most disliked retcons in comic book history. Since this has been revealed, Scarlet Witch has become even more reviled by the superhero and mutant community, being referred to as a pretender and despised by most mutants. I just feel really bad for Wanda. This woman cannot get a break in the comics. Can we just give Wanda a break? Can Wanda be cool? Could she be cool again?
First of all, I have to get this out of the way. Man, do I love talking about the Avengers vs. X-Men storyline. The Phoenix Force is heading towards Earth, and the Avengers, obviously fearing the almighty entity, made Iron Man and Giant Man prepare a disruptor weapon to kill the Phoenix Force. Instead of killing it though, the blast alters the entity and divides it into 5 fragments that forcefully bond with 5 X-Men. Namor, Magic, Colossus, Emma Frost, and of course, their leader Cyclops. While the heroes tried to use this awesome power gallantly and responsibly, they ended up leaving quite a bit of damage behind them. Possessed by the Phoenix, Cyclops killed Professor Xavier and led many attacks against humans and mutants alike. Afterwards, he did adopt a more of a revolutionary attitude, leading a rebellious team of X-Men and coming into conflict with other superheroes and his former friend Wolverine on more than one occasion. Because of all this, Cyclops was briefly viewed as a martyr, believed to have been killed by Black Bolt in Death of X before it was revealed he had just succumbed to Mpox just days before.
To be honest, Carnage has had a few shocking assumed deaths over the recent years. One of these happened during the events of Axis when Carnage's alignment was inverted. Carnage took on the mantle of your friendly neighborhood Carnage and set out to try and be a hero, which was already surprising and disturbing enough, especially considering that Cletus Cassidy was still psychopathic and still had violent urges and tendencies that he struggled against. One of the most surprising moments of Axis was when Carnage helped in the fight against the alignment reversed evil X-Men, who attempted to set off a gene bomb which would kill all humans in the vicinity. I feel like it was a big vicinity, but I'll let people in the comments argue how big that vicinity was. I think it was like all of New York. Spider-Man, who was still a hero, and Carnage were unable to defuse the bomb in time, and so Carnage chose to sacrifice himself, shapeshifting around it to absorb and prevent its blast radius. Of course, we assumed that Carnage had been killed during this noble act, but like most other times when we suspected Cletus dead, he just lost his legs and would later return to his evil ways.
In the last issue of the original Watchmen limited series entitled A Strong and Loving World, we get a truly shocking reveal. Ozymandias was actually the bad guy all along. Turns out he was responsible for the deaths of thousands in New York, the death of the comedian, the accusations on Dr. Manhattan, and the framing of Moloch. Sure, that is shocking to say the least, but there's actually more, as it's what happens after that that's truly shocking. Now, don't get me wrong, Ozymandias' intentions were good. He did all that he could to prevent a nuclear war between the Soviet Union and the US. But it was still an injustice for Rorschach, and he wanted to expose Ozymandias. Setting out to do so, Rorschach encounters Dr. Manhattan and tells him exactly what happened. Dr. Manhattan tries to stop Rorschach from exposing Ozymandias, but Rorschach responded by saying that Manhattan had to kill him first in order to stop him. Now, in a shocking turn of events, Dr. Manhattan actually vaporized Rorschach and chose to believe in Ozymandias' cause instead. If you haven't already read this limited series, I highly recommend that you go back and check it out, starting with 1986's Watchmen, number 1.
Parallax entity is the sentient embodiment of fear, the symbol of fear, rather. So, once Hal Jordan becomes the Green Lantern after Abin Sur in Sector 2814, Sinestro made Parallax choose Hal Jordan to free itself from the central battery. Parallax spent many years influencing Hal over time, causing doubt and fear to flood his mind. Once the destruction of Coast City happened, that plus the central battery that Hal destroyed, the entity Parallax was able to latch itself onto Hal Jordan's soul. Not good. Hal's strong willpower made this plan take years to be complete, but once Cyborg Superman helped destroy Coast City, he could only hold on to that willpower for so long. Pushing through all of the anger and grief, Hal Jordan ended up sacrificing his own life to reignite the Earth's sun. That a boy, Hal. This is actually a really sad moment, like, holy
Easily one of the most trusted but not the most trusting heroes around, it should really come as no surprise that Batman had secret files outlining the ways to take down his teammates just in case, right? Well, apparently it was pretty shocking for the other members of the Justice League during the Tower of Babel storyline. It's an insane level of preparation, like Batman prepared for some truly brutal plans, including blinding Green Lantern and turning Superman's skin invisible so that he'd go insane from yellow sun overexposure. It was revealed in JLA Tower of Babel that these files were stolen by Ra's al Ghul and used to orchestrate a debilitatingly effective attack on the individual members of the JLA. When Batman comes clean with how the villain was able to pinpoint their various weaknesses, half of his teammates vote for him to be booted out of the group. However, he ends up leaving on his own accord, but his friendship with the other members was deeply damaged, and even to this day it remains a bit of a problem. Even in the New 52 universe, such plans still existed and Batman came clean about it, but thankfully this time Superman was able to convince the League not to hold it against him.
Owen Reese, aka Molecule Man, was a longtime villain until recently. After his involvement in God Emperor Doom's battle world, where he was basically kept as a prisoner and used as a power source by Dr. Doom, Reese agreed to help Mr. Fantastic rebuild the multiverse. Using Molecule Man's power, Reed Richards succeeded in doing so, returning the multiverse to the way it was meant to be and kind of improving it in some areas. Unfortunately, during their adventures together, the Future Foundation was set upon by a new villain known as the Griever at the End of All Things, who had her endlings devour Molecule Man's body. Because he had used parts of himself to anchor the multiverse, Molecule Man was no longer as infinite as he once had been, and randomly died at the hands of this new villain. Wow. What a way to go, especially considering he was such a cool villain. Oh well. There have been quite a few shocking moments that have come to us from 90s comics, but one of the most dramatic and also the weirdest thereafter was when Magneto stripped all the adamantium from Wolverine's skeleton, pulling it out of his body. This was insanely painful for Wolverine, but he managed to survive the forced debonding process. However, it left him somewhat changed, and he almost died during the process. Wolverine became more animalistic and also lost his nose for some reason. Wolverine would remain without his adamantium and sort of without his nose for almost 8 years, which is also pretty crazy to think about, especially when it's considered such an iconic part of Wolverine's power set. Not his nose, his adamantium. Although he does have superhuman senses, so I guess his nose is part of his power set. Oh my goodness. Black Mask had crossed paths with Catwoman before, and he had even tortured her sister Maggie. But he likely never expected Selina to kill him because, well, she thought of herself a hero usually. However, the next time he moved to threaten her, kidnapping and torturing Slam Bradley, a Gotham detective and sometimes ally of Catwoman's, he realized he messed with Selina at the wrong time. The Black Mask ended up taking on Catwoman directly, thinking he had her cornered while he threatened pretty much everyone she loved. Of course, Black Mask was unaware that Catwoman was currently questioning her own alignment, having just discovered that she had been manipulated into becoming a hero by Zatanna. He was as surprised as we were when Catwoman decided to shoot him right in the head, killing him. She was like, am I a hero, am I a villain? Maybe I'm both. You can be both, I think. I think that's a thing. It's called an anti-hero.
Taking place in a prequel to the Injustice Gods Among Us storyline, we find Superman as the leader of Earth. Makes sense? Look at him. I mean, all those powers. Of course. Using his powers to brutally enforce peace, Green Lantern, aka Guy Gardner, wasn't really a fan of his whole concept. Good Guy Gardner. He was also onto something after all, because Guy eventually discovered that Superman had been an ally to the Sinestro Corps. Traitor. So he goes and gathers his own army, the Green Lantern Corps. Hal Jordan actually took Superman's side here, but that's only because he originally thought that Guy had killed John Stewart, which in fact Sinestro actually did. Got a little, quite the triangle we got here, boys. Hal ended up tearing off Guy Gardner's arm, Bucky Barnes style, before leaving him for death. Not a good way to go.
This was an especially shocking story arc. Known as Born Again, in this story, Daredevil's secret identity is sold out by his ex-girlfriend Karen Page, who had become a heroin addict and, while desperate, sold his true identity for a hit. This information got passed around and eventually made its way back to Kingpin. It's never good when your arch-nemesis finds out your secret civilian identity, but for Matt Murdock, this was one of the worst things that would ever happen to him. Kingpin uses information to destroy Daredevil's life on pretty much every level, taking his money and his home, and even using it to destroy his relationship with his current girlfriend, and even destroy his costume. Geez, guy had nothing left. Eventually, Wilson Fisk would get what was coming to him, but before that would happen, he would still make protecting and living in Hell's Kitchen a living hell for Matt Murdock.